I'm Beth Pariseau, Senior News Writer at Informa Tech Target, and this is IT Ops Query Season 3, Observability in the Age of AI. Torsten Volk is Principal Analyst for Application Modernization at Enterprise Strategy Group, now part of Omdia. Previously, he was a Managing Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates for nearly 8 years, where he was the architect behind the EMA Research Factory, a machine learning and generative AI-based data platform for delivering near real-time market analysis and offering actionable insights that shaped market trends. He's also worked as a product manager, marketer, and professional services specialist for multiple technology companies. And in every role, he has embraced data-centric strategies. Thanks for joining us, Torsten.
Thanks for having me.
So as your bio attests, machine learning and data analytics have been a part of business strategy for a while, and you're no stranger to those. So what difference does generative AI make in that realm?
It makes a big difference in many ways. And one of them being that it makes AI accessible to the end user, to the business user. It lets you and I, who are not developers, who are not data scientists, play with AI solutions on a daily basis. And if we are deliberate and if we are clever about it, can save us time and can bring great results on a daily basis for all kinds of stuff in your business life and in your personal life. I probably overdo it with my use, but I think it makes it really accessible. That's number one.
What do you use? I'm curious.
I'm using everything. That's the thing. People always laugh about that. I use everything from Perplexity to Claude to, of course, ChatGPT. I have local, any GPT. I have the LLM Studio, open source, and multiple agent frameworks. And if I used fewer, I'd get a lot more done.
Okay, well, that's the opposite of what we usually hear about AI. Are you using them just to get experience with the tools or to do some other kind of project?
No, not experience with it. No, there's always things that as an analyst, I look at data. I like data and agent frameworks and GenAI can help you process a ton of data. That's actually number two, number one, accessibility. Number two, it's a monstrous data processing tool. So what I love to do is, like, Perplexity has that ability to research on Reddit specifically. So if I have some obscure question where I would have nobody to talk about with, I can talk about Reddit, and there will be some nerdy forum that discusses that question, and I get fabulous answers there usually. And then I can dig a little bit deeper, and I get quotes, and it's all in all a very productive rabbit hole that you just have to limit to not pour too much of your time into.
Right. You have experience in your current role and in the past advising companies on business application modernization. So how does generative AI and observability factor into that process?
So there's really two ways that we need to discuss, and it gets confounded continuously. So I'm still doing my best to keep it separate. So way number one is, and that's what you hear from AWS, Azure, all of those cloud service providers and consulting firms. And that is, everybody has their own framework, their agent framework, to help from the planning stage all the way to the testing stage of the modernized application, to make things easier, to automate parts of it, and specifically valuable in the documentation. Like we looked a lot at mainframe, the old COBOL stuff, where nobody understands it anymore unless there may be a few people still there. But even they, if they have worked on this stuff, on this code base, it's massive. And there's data embedded in the code often, and it's very difficult. And if you use AI agents to help you with the discovery, then that is tremendously useful. And the key is that you understand where the limits are, and that the key differentiator really is to make those AI agents talk to the human, right? Because you can't just say to the AI agent, go ahead and modernize that whole application, right? Cut it into individual pieces and make sure those pieces talk, and then there's no performance loss, and there is the cost of the networking will be fine, the latency will all be good. You have to make that an iterative process, and that is what companies are currently working on, and that's what sets these systems apart, agent systems in general. Do they actually work to support the human? Do they know when to put the human in the loop? And in general, cloud providers have a huge incentive to make that easy to modernize apps, because the modernized apps go often to the cloud providers, right? I have my big monolithic Java app, and if I cut this into microservices, chances are that I want to host it on Kubernetes somewhere managed in one of the big cloud providers. So that's the one aspect of things. And the other aspect of things is helping developers achieve better capabilities, customization, for example, for clients, make the application functionality much better than with deterministic programming. And that's another big area where a lot of companies, a lot of segments of the market, of the app modernization market, are working on in platform engineering. How do I make it easy to incorporate Gen AI capabilities for developers to incorporate AI capabilities? And that's in progress. We are early days there, because developers, they're not used to being able to have a probabilistic model where they can just enter stuff and they get an answer without having coded a bunch of rules. Right now, they can just talk to that model and they get something out, and it may not even be the same that they get out next time. And there's a lot needed to make developers comfortable, and to also then make the operations guys comfortable. But adding Gen AI capabilities to software and trying to do that opens up a whole new world of competitive advantages that you can get, right? Because imagine you have apps on your phone, they know your background specifically, and they can actually talk to you about your own banking problems versus in general give you advice on an IRA or whatever product there is. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. And does any of that tie back to observability? I know we ran into each other at Dynatrace Perform, and we talked about that topic too.
Oh, yeah.
How does that tie in together?
Yeah, it's interesting. Observability, it's the same thing, right? Observability uses AI. And when I say AI, I mean basically everything, not just Gen AI. Can go back to the early days of machine learning, can be simple formulas, can be cross-correlating of data streams. But all of those tools allow to better contextualize metrics that you see about your application, and it shows the end user, right? Because we still have those issues about being flooded with alerts, and if you contextualize those alerts by being able to process massive, it always comes down to processing massive amounts of information in near real time and making sense of that, because that is what humans cannot do, right? This is in no way does Gen AI replace humans, but what it helps humans to basically widen that bottleneck in your brain, that you cannot look at data streams that just keep rolling down and make any sense of them whatsoever. And the AI can pre-qualify what's interesting from the perspective of your company. You can feed it information of what's important to you, and it can learn from what worked in your company specifically, or in your industry, or for you as a person. And based on that, it can make decisions in terms of how important is a certain metric to this person. And then say, yeah, that's a big thing that I have to wake this person up on a Saturday night, or it's something that's because that can wait. And the fact that a button or an alert is red versus orange versus green doesn't really mean anything, because maybe I don't care about something being down, right? Maybe I don't care about something being down on a specific day or a specific time of year. And adding all of that context and understanding, we talk about intent. The AI knows my intent, and my intent is to serve my customers, to keep my revenue up, to follow basically my strategic goals. And the AI can keep all of that in mind and pre-qualify what an observability system serves up. So it doesn't have to flood me with dashboards where everybody builds, there's a problem, you build 5 dashboards. It can actually give you actual insights and say, here's what I recommend, and here's why I recommend this, and here's the list, and here's where I get the information from. And based on all of that, I can then say, yeah, that's great, or no, you're overlooking something.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really a tremendous improvement. And there's tremendous room for further improvement in observability because, again, we're just at the beginning. And then on the other side, again, there is that challenge of providing observability and monitoring AI. And that's not just about latency, that's really, or health or performance in terms of, does it deliver results at all? Is the server down or is the service available? But it's much more about, does it recommend maybe my competition to my customer, or does it give legal advice by accident or financial advice so that I'm on the hook for something? Or do the results degrade based on conversation the AI had with one of my colleagues before and with me after, and then the next person, the AI may have shifted the agent may have shifted its perception of what's needed, and it comes up with some crazy result, or it pulls up some hallucination. That it's always my favorite example as a research person, as an analyst, basically. My favorite example is always, I use GenAI to process massive amounts of data, and I have situations where the GenAI comes up and says, 37.5% of people use XYZ product, and come up with incredible statistics. And then I click on the source link and I say, oh, but where is that statistic? And then the AI, and that happens to Claude, that happens to ChatGPT, that happens to all of them. Then the AI said, oh, yeah, I just put in example data. This is just a template data. I just had that yesterday. It was an app that I wrote. It's just template data. Now that I know that you want actually real data, next time I'll give you real data.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Now I'm prepped for that. And those are things that there's observability tools and guardrails that are in development to curb that. But I feel like we don't even know half of what can happen there.
Yeah, that's a little scary when you're thinking about monitoring and troubleshooting and automating in a production environment, right?
Yeah. Because people, if you're not a subject matter expert, or if you're not careful, like you can do sanity checks with the data, where I thought, that is awfully specific. I'm pretty sure ESG or Informa doesn't have that data.
Wow.
And it doesn't actually. You can't just replace the human. It's an advertisement not to get rid of us analysts. We are still there for something.
Yeah. And then, of course, you would need some form of visibility when you're like refactoring an application and that iterative process you mentioned. You'd also need some visibility into what's happening there, right?
Yeah, I think the visibility is the key, right? And that's what they are working on with the deep research products, where you see the advanced reasoning. That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
The advanced reasoning, where you can then see it writes out its thought process. And it's actually funny. It writes out, oh, it seems like XYZ person wants me to do this. That seems like a challenge. And you can see it talk to itself. And you can see if it goes down the wrong rabbit hole. And you can then have another model that watches that thought. It's a little bit like they trained Big Blue, where they had multiple chess computers play at the same time and learn at the same time in parallel. You do that with agents, where you have one project manager agent, and a project manager agent says, oof, this took already 40 minutes and the problem doesn't seem so difficult, and we've solved similar problems in 10 minutes. Why don't you start over again? And it says that to that other agent, right, that took so long. So that project manager agent doesn't really know how to solve anything, but it knows about how long something normally takes, depending on how difficult it is, depending on how many people are involved, depending on what technologies are involved. And it helps you there. So there's all kinds of approaches that companies and individual enterprises are working on to solve this issue. And transparency has been the issue way before Gen AI, right? That's why it was always so frustrating to see AI use cases with like predictive AI really only applied to large companies and very large value use cases like insurance and financial things, because it was just not worth it and it was too difficult. And now that it's easier, we still need to make sure that it's transparent and it doesn't lead us down rabbit holes that make us waste a whole day where otherwise it would have been done in 10 minutes.
Yeah, and on that front, there's been a ton of hype about agentic AI just in the last 6 or 8 months, mostly this year. But at least in my experience, it's been tough to find even large enterprises that have any agents in production. So, how do you expect that enterprise adoption to play out, and what do people need to realize the benefits of agentic AI?
It's an extremely, I always like to describe this as basically you can add free human resources or free team members to your team in the form of AI agents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's generally true, right? And
Mm-hmm.
getting to that proof of concept where this looks really, really promising. And wow, we feel all so much more productive. And look at how much code we wrote, or look at how many customers we served. Or that is all very promising in the prototype stage, in the pilot stage.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to that final 5%, it's always the joke. Software developers, I can easily write 95% of the code in an hour, and the other 5 take me another 2 months because it may not even be possible to achieve certain things. Like look at self-driving cars and things like that, where it looked like we were almost there and everything. Yeah, we are not really there. And what we need, and that's where a lot of software companies are working on, is that when those agent workflows, every time they base a decision on an LLM, it's another probabilistic decision, right? So you have that decision tree, and it gets wider and wider and wider. And at every stage, you add probabilistic uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, a probabilistic model never says the same thing twice, but it may also go down a separate rabbit hole, and then you base the next decision and the next decision and the next decision on that. And then you have a big liability potentially. And that's why you see small agent deployments with only a couple of agents or with only one agent doing a certain thing, which is already great and productive because you can give that agent a task. But to really have complex workflows, you need some serious experience and staff and testing and budget and everything to get that done at an enterprise level. And that's the next big frontier where I keep seeing startups coming out that come up with solutions. I talked to one earlier this morning. It's really interesting solutions that I don't actually really fully yet understand. Where I think, man, it's mathematically really difficult because what they need to do is combine the flexibility of probabilistic large language models with the deterministic code so that it can actually be used together so that you get an elastic model where you don't have to predefine every single use case or every single answer. But on the other hand, you also get results that you can predict. And that is the challenge. The longer those workflows get, the less you can predict the results and the more risky all of that gets. But, we are scratching the tip of the iceberg with all of this stuff.
Right. And what's been your experience so far with working with agent frameworks? What are they like as far as their accuracy, their performance? What's been your experience with that?
See, this is the thing. For me, it's incredible, right? It's like what's it called? Open Manus. There's that one that takes over you can give it control over a virtual browser and you can literally tell it to do a certain thing, like subscribe to those 5 newspapers for me. No, but summarize what's going on at KubeCon in fall and do that by crawling the agenda that's already online and give me the key themes. And I've done that actually with Open Manus and it does that, right? So as a human, would have been a real big pain to read this or to manually copy those things out into a Word document and then throw it to ChatGPT. It's too much work. And this thing actually does that. And that's, to me, as somebody who is, everything I do is based on information, that's incredible.
Right.
Or I want to know what's going on Reddit and on Hacker News on a daily basis. And being able to then say, oh, give me a digest of everything that interests me from the sources that I like, and I just tell it the sources and every morning I get my digest from that. That is fabulous. But again, that is not something that I would sell to a colleague because It's very specific to me because it has all of those downsides. Because there's a lot of things that can go wrong or that may not be consistent. And before I quote anything in any publication, I always have to go back to the source and really triple check that it didn't make something up, that it didn't crawl something else. But you can feel that we are getting very much closer to where we want to be. And I'm saying that from the perspective of when I did my master's thesis in 2003, that was based on latent semantic analysis. And we had exactly that vision that we're talking about today. We only got to the 70% mark with what we built, where the results were stunning, but not usable. They were like, wow, before I could have never gotten that. Like we did queries in multiple languages, or we queried multiple language sources in one language without needing keywords and stuff. And that gave reasonable results, but also a bunch of garbage in between so that it wasn't really usable. But now we are so much closer, I feel, to something that really revolutionizes how we process information.
Cool. So what do you think enterprises should know that they don't know about generative and agentic AI and observability? Are there any misconceptions out there you've come across?
I'm sure. No, it's basically what we were talking about. What should I know is, every time you have so much marketing hype, like about agentic AI and Gen AI, there is disillusionment, right? There's then situations where you see, wow, this really doesn't work, and that always is because people treat it like it is almost a human being, like it has its own understanding of the problems it's solving. What you have to, before you plan any of those projects, you have to be aware of how it thinks, and that it doesn't really think, but that it calculates, all it does is it calculates the next token based on its context and based on your previous tokens that you entered. By token, I mean term, word. Probabilistically, based on incredibly much information that's there in the internet, whatever they indexed into those things. And usually you don't know what it is, but it calculates the next word, and it is good at doing that. But then you cannot ask it, and you cannot rely on any advanced reasoning without having ultimate degrees of transparency. And you need to be clear that it's an iterative process. There is no consulting firm that comes in and says, okay, here's the tool, here's 10 hours of training. Now you go and migrate those 1,000 applications. Every time I talk to those companies, it's application by application. And then you define a group maybe of 10 applications that are so similar that you can reasonably believe, yeah, I can apply the same workflow and I can have success with that. Then I still have to test it afterward. But then the other 1,480 applications still are individual challenges, and you don't know when you come in how much of that you can automate and how much of that you have to do by hand, if you will. And exploring that, of course, you can use AI and specifically Gen AI to get a lay of the land and to help you, but you need subject matter expert at every stage of that process. And that's actually the biggest piece of advice. The way the different AI projects, the successful ones and the not so successful ones, and the good software and the not so good software, the way they differ is how they include the human in that process, how they keep the human up to date, and how they make it transparent to the human person why a specific result was created, and how they process the feedback from the human. That could be as much as, oh, they see that the ticket is resolved, right, very quickly after that piece of advice. And that points me toward maybe that was a good idea. Maybe I should investigate, was that ticket resolved in a productive way, or was it just resolved to get done with it? So it is not a clear-cut scenario in most of those ways. And that's why I came back to that financial thing, to that financial example, right? We can be much more flexible than just look at, oh, should I insure that person? And if so, how much should I charge, right? And that's exciting. We can go much, much closer to that, to a real topic. But we need that interaction with humans. We need to be aware of the limitations, and that AI doesn't really think, and it doesn't really have an idea of what it's talking about. And that if you're unlucky because you don't understand its thought processes in the background, right? It's a massive neural network. You have to factor in a lot of research time and a lot of POC time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can already see my answer was so long. It's not trivial.
And also, we've started to hear about open source, open standards for multi-agent orchestration and communication like MCP, Model Context Protocol, agent to agent from Google, but it's still really early for those things. So do you think that's also going to be an important piece to putting enterprise agents in production?
Yeah, that deals with part of what I was describing, where agents influence one another in the workflow and all the interactions. And MCP is exactly for that, where you can have basically stateless interaction with I mean, they describe it as like you can tap in the different tools without actually breaking anything. And you make it easier for developers to pull this stuff in. The developer doesn't have to write a bunch of code just to extract some data from your ticketing system or from your whatever data source, or from anything. Can be a tool, can be a database. And making that easier makes it easier for developers to experiment and to use data sources. And data is a huge problem, right? So making data accessible to agents and allowing developers to use data for the agents, that's a huge deal. And this Google agent to agent thing is also, it's very interesting, right? It's like every standard at the very beginning, it doesn't seem spectacular. But one of the big problems is that you build agents in a company and everybody's using their own agent framework, and those agents can't really talk. So Google suggests that as a standard, that agent to agent protocol, and it's one of multiple, but yeah, it's a start. It's like open telemetry. Remember when open telemetry was just a thought, and today we see it as a main standard. So MCP and agent to agent could end up like that theoretically. Yeah. What I'm saying is we need a solution for that issue, and they propose one, and it's early in the game. Maybe it is the solution.
We shall see. All right. So again, thank you, Torsten, for your insights. I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thanks for having me.
This has been IT Ops Query Season 3, Observability in the Age of AI. If you have any feedback on this episode or want to share questions, comments, or stories we should consider covering, please reach out to me at beth.pariseau, that's PARISEAU, at informatechtarget.com. Please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast on your platform of choice, and tune in next week for our continued conversations with industry experts about how observability is shaping AI and how AI is shaping observability.